Cohen, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to, if you can notice in the background, there's a television screen in my office where the Washington Nationals are playing a baseball game. 4 of their players are in COVID restrictions. 8 of their personnel are in COVID restrictions. I think masks is a good idea, and especially on airplanes and where public gathers in small spaces. But I want to thank Chairman DeFazio and Member Graves for holding this hearing. Most of the transportation industry was devastated with significant declines because of COVID-19, people afraid to fly and concerned about flying next to people. And even with masks, it's still somewhat concerning. We resuscitated the industry with lots of aid, but some of it was far from perfect in how it was delivered. One issue I worked on extensively was the disproportionate share of CARES Act grants that were awarded to certain smaller, less trafficked airports at the expense of our major commercial hub airports who service most of the public and do most of the work and need most of the money, including Memphis, which is the world's largest cargo airport in the world. These award amounts were based on a formula developed by the Senate and the Federal Aviation Administration that produced massive windfalls for certain small airports. As many as 31 airports received grants for at least 4 years worth of operating expenses and over and above. So they would have had 4 years worth of operating expenses without any monies that they would otherwise have received. Fortunately, the wrong-headed formula was changed. The airports, for the future funding, they didn't receive a disproportionate share of funding from additional pandemic and 2 subsequent relief bills based on the pandemic. Nevertheless, the amounts that were awarded at certain airports under the CARES Act were far more than needed or were fair. Mr. Soskin, can you tell me why the formula was written this way in the first place and what your office is doing to monitor the smaller airports in their use of that money and to see to it that it's properly spent in accordance with FAA grant requirements?
Congressman Cohen, as Ms. Krause highlighted earlier, one of the trade-offs that we face in awarding emergency relief funding, like in the CARES Act and CARISA and the ARP, is the trade-off between doing something new and unfamiliar for the agencies administering funds and making use of existing mechanisms, existing programs, and existing formulas. In this case, I think it's instructive, the responsive approach that was taken by FAA when it identified the multi-years of operating expenses that you referenced and updated and limited the funding beyond a certain point. And then Congress in the CARISA extended that and narrowed the scope.
Mr. Soskin, I know the history. I've been through it and found it difficult to get through it. The question was, why was it written that way in the first place? It wasn't using a formula that we already had. It was a new formula that the Senate and the FAA came up with. Why did they do that?
That's a question that we may look at as part of our current audit in the FAA's award and oversight of CARES Act funds, beyond its potential inclusion in that ongoing audit work.
Mr. Soskin, thank you. You're not answering the question, but I'll go on to Ms. Krause and hopefully she'll be better at doing that. What can you tell us about how much of the grants that were awarded to these small airports has been used and whether larger commercial service airports are getting enough funding from the FAA to meet their needs?
Yeah, we have some data and we can give you more specifics, but at the highest level, the larger airports, when you're looking across the different funding streams have expended more funds than the smaller ones. So when you're looking at like the large hub airports, you're seeing about 75% of their funds that they've received across the 3 buckets of money having been expended, where you're seeing lesser funds closer. It all depends. We can give you more details, but when you get to the smaller airports, it's a smaller percentage, but in some cases, around 50% or so. So I'm happy to give you more details on sort of the spend rates across
the airport. If you can, and if they're spending that money on superfluous things, they had plenty of funds. They basically have long dirt runways and a wind socket. They didn't really need all that money. And what are they spending it on now? Is extraneous things just to spend the money. This was horrific. And if you let me know about that, Mr. Soskin, if you give me your report, let me know why that was done and what's being done to oversee it and make sure that the money's being spent properly. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.